In this video, I really want to talk about bass fishing in the month of May. Now, I'm not going to specifically talk about a lot of different techniques. I will mention some, but I already did a lure video for the month of May that I will link at the end of this video. But I really want to talk about kind of just a few things to be on the lookout for in the month of May, kind of what the fish are doing. Because if you kind of know what the fish are doing, there's a number of different baits that you can use to target these fish. So in this video, we're going to talk all about the month of May. Now, before we get into it, this video is brought to you by my apparel company, Fin Fishing. I am running a sale right now over at Fin Fishing for the month of May. It's kind of a package deal. You can get a USA made sun shirt. I got a couple of new colors and a duck hat for 75 bucks. So that's a savings of, I think, almost 20% on the combo deal. And I will leave some links down below in the description. All right, let's talk a little bit about the month of May. Now, to me, May fishing is some of my favorite fishing that you can experience throughout the entire year. And I think the reason is because there's so many different fish in so many different stages. So that really allows you as an angler to kind of pick out some of your strengths, some of the things that you like to do, and go out there and do it and be successful doing it. You know, certain times of the year, you really kind of have to be doing certain things in order to catch fish. But in May, they're doing so many different things. You can go out there, you can fish your strengths, and you can catch a lot of fish. Now, besides up in the northern part of the country, like if you live in the Minnesotas, in the Michigans, in the New Yorks, even more north of that, most of the fish are either kind of in the spawning phase in the month of May, or they are kind of starting to make their way out to more of their summertime kind of structures and covers, kind of getting around their summertime patterns. But if you live up in, you know, I've bed fished in New York in June before. And so there's always going to be different waves that are kind of coming up, they're spawning and they're moving off. But one of the biggest things that you see a lot in the month of May, one of the most important things to always be on the lookout for is some sort of shad spawn. In a lot of the lakes, rivers, and reservoirs, you have threadfin shad, you have gizzard shad. And in the month of May, it seems like you have a really good shad spawn. Now, if you guys are unfamiliar with a shad spawn, it's just a really awesome time of the year where you can catch a lot of fish really quick, but after the fish are done feeding, it can actually be fairly difficult to catch them. So it's really important to pay attention to your lakes and rivers and ponds, whatever that it may be that have shad in them when this is happening, because it can go down literally in 20 minutes and just be over for the rest of the day. Now, shad actually are very active doing their spawning process in low light hours. And so really early in the morning, really late in the evening, this is when you tend to have the best opportunity to catch a lot of bass, because these shad will actually come up, and what they do is they kind of scurry along hard objects. For example, dock floats, dock posts, different grasses across the United States. You know, I've seen them do this in Kissimmee grass, different types of vegetation. You see them do this on riprap banks, rock banks. They like to lay their eggs on harder structures and covers. And so I've actually had shad spawn on my boat before. Being in a shad spawn area and literally having shad come up against the side of my boat. And literally this is something that you will visibly see. The shad will come up, they'll kind of make this little kick across the cover, whatever it may be, and they're literally just throwing eggs out. I don't know what it is, the eggs are just coming out. And so when they are doing this, they are very susceptible to bass feeding on them, because the bass can now pin them to whatever cover it is. They know exactly where they're going to be, where in the water column they're going to be. They know everything. So the bass really take advantage of the shad. And so again, this is usually an early morning thing, usually a late in the evening thing. A couple of things that will prolong a shad spawn throughout the day. One, low light conditions. If you have a cloudy day, a rainy day, that can prolong that shad spawn for it to really happen all day long. Also, if you get into really areas that have a lot of shade, this can also prolong that shad spawn. I feel like you don't see this all the time, but actually where I had that shad spawning on my boat, I was in a shade pocket in the middle of the day. So another thing that can prolong this is dirty water, muddy water, just being really low clarity. I've seen shad spawning throughout the entire day. Now, the best thing about this is that there's a number of baits that you can use. I mean, swim jigs, spinner baits, jerk baits, crank baits, top waters of all kinds, anything that somewhat mimics a shad, a bait fish, you can catch them on. Sometimes you just kind of have to cater the technique that you are fishing to whatever structure or cover you might be fishing. For example, maybe you're fishing around bank grass. Bank grass, typically a bait like a swim jig is going to come through a lot easier, and so that's going to be a really good option there. Maybe you're fishing around docks. You know, on a dock, a swim jig could also work. I also like to use a bait like a chatterbait and actually skip the chatterbait up, keep it really high in the water column where those fish kind of come up. But a shad spawn is definitely something you want to be on the lookout for. A big thing with the shad spawn that I should have mentioned at the beginning, and I'm actually going to mention again here in a minute, is that this happens a lot during a full moon period. So recently we've kind of been on whatever periods, the other periods of the moons, I don't know them super well, but when you come up on a full moon, that's typically when you're going to see a lot of shad pushing up and doing a lot of spawning. So always be on the lookout for that in the month of May. Another huge bait fish spawn we have to talk about that really starts to get going in the month of May are bluegill. Bluegill. This is something that I really didn't take advantage of early on when I first started bass fishing a whole lot. I didn't always go out there and seek out bluegill beds. I would notice them at times, but I wouldn't always seek out bass that are eating bluegill. And it's really kind of dumb of me because I was fortunate enough to grow up on a pond where I would see the bluegill come up and spawn, and I could visibly, the pond was really clear, I could visibly see bass that were hanging around the edges, going up there, nabbing bluegill from time to time and coming off. And I would always catch bass just, you know, winging around a Cinco around those areas. The same thing happens in bigger lakes and in bigger rivers and in all kinds of different water. And since bluegill is probably one of the most prevalent bait fish that we have, this happens everywhere. I mean, from the northern part of the country all the way down to the most southern part of the country, you will have these bluegill spawns. In the south, people tend to call them brim, so you look for a lot of brim beds. I've always wondered why different parts of the country call bluegills and crappie and all that different things, but that's a different video for a different day. But anyways, look out for this. This is something that sometimes when I know the bluegill are bedding, I will just put my trolling motor on high on my boat, like as high as it can go, and I am simply looking for as many active bluegill beds as I can. And usually the fishing around these areas is fairly simple as well. It's kind of like the shad spawn. When you're around it, there's a number of baits that you can use. When you're around a bluegill spawn, there are a number of baits that you can use. You can use, you know, glide baits, and you can use swim jigs, and you can use wacky rig Cincos. You can use top waters like frogs and all kinds of baits around those bluegill beds. But the biggest thing is that you're going to know pretty quick if there are bass around. Usually a bluegill bed would be pretty vast. Sometimes you'll see them as big as, you know, half a deck, half of your boat, you know, maybe 10 foot by 10 foot. Other times you'll see these massive ones that just stretch on for a long, long ways. I tend to like the more isolated, you know, 10, 15, 20 foot sections where it seems like 1, 2, 3 bass can kind of get around them and kind of hang out and go up there and nab them. So the thing with this is if it is happening on a lake that you are fishing, if you can hit 50 bluegill beds in a day, I'm telling you what, this is one of the best ways to catch a really big bag of fish. And I'm talking big ones, because there's a lot of fish that were just spawning, a lot of bass that were just spawning, that instead of them moving out right away, some of them are going to stay. Some of those big females are going to stay around. They're going to wait for the bluegill to actually start spawning, and then they're going to come up there and eat them. And so it's something that the cool thing about the bluegill spawn is not only does it happen across the nation in every single body of water pretty much, but it also happens a lot of times throughout the year. And like I just said with the shad spawn, this is something that happens around a full moon a lot. So anytime I have a full moon, I am looking around for these bluegill beds. I'm gonna seek them out. I'm gonna find as many as I can. I'm gonna hit as many as I can and try to catch the big bass that are around these. And I'm telling you, last year, the biggest largemouth I caught in a tournament came around a bluegill bed. And it was more in like the June, July time frame. So when a lot of fish should be offshore, one of the biggest ones that actually ended up getting big bass of the tournament was shallow, and it was around a bluegill bed. And so that is something that you really need to look out for. One thing with a bluegill bed is that some of the best bluegill beds will have like decent amount of cover really close by. So sometimes they'll have a lay down tree really close by, maybe a patch of grass, maybe a dock. And a lot of times those bass are going to hang on that cover and they'll shoot up there and grab those bluegill beds. A lot of times when I'm actually fishing a bluegill bed, I'm not casting my bait right directly over the bluegill. I'm working the outside edges of the bluegill bed, and I'm also working any cover that is really close to that bluegill bed as well. And so now, the next thing that I think that is really important to look out for in May, and this is something that, kind of like the bluegill bed, I feel like I didn't do it a whole lot growing up, and it's probably more or less because I just didn't understand a lot of bodies of water. But something that I found is that some bass, like we talked about with bass that stay shallow, there are some bass that want to live out deep all year long. They want to live really, really deep. And as soon as a lot of bass are done spawning, some of the deepest bass that you will catch all year long will happen directly in the post spawn, as soon as those fish leave the bait. And the reason that I say that these are some of the deepest fish that you will find is because during this time of the year, the late spring, early summer, a lot of thermoclines have not developed on lakes. And typically when you have a thermocline that starts to develop, it really cuts the oxygen out that's below that thermocline. And as that thermocline rises, it kind of forces the fish to be in a shallower water column. Well, in May and in the post spawn, there is no thermocline. Those fish can swim out and be in 50 and 60 foot of water. That might be really deep for some of you guys. That may be not as deep for others. But they can be in really deep water. And so what I've learned over the years, and I talked about this a little bit on a video recently, but I always like to try to check some just really off the wall deep spots, because if you find these really deep areas, typically you're going to be one of the only people fishing it, and so you'll have it to yourself. And typically the ones that are there are big ones. They are big post-spawn females that spawn quick and they're out of there. They like to live deep. They're going to go back to their deep haunts. So it might be a rock pile, a brush pile. It might be fish that are on bait as well. But that is something that I really like to look out for in the month of May. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to the month of May, and we kind of already touched on it here and there, is that there's always going to be a shallow water population of fish. And in the month of May, it's probably even bigger because you have so many fish that are living their life around the spawn. And so sometimes different lakes will kind of warm up at different times. You know, different parts of the lake will warm up at different times of the year. You know, the northern section of lakes might get a lot warmer, a lot faster. And so sometimes you will find, if you think of about a big lake, there will be more fish in a shallow water area per capita in one part of the lake than there will be in other parts. So sometimes closer to the dam in the month of May, where that water has just started to rise, you have more fish that are shallower than maybe fish that are up the lake. Now, I'm not saying that's always true. I'm just saying that sometimes if I'm going out there and I'm like, I just want to fish shallow, I want to fish shallow, I really pay attention to where I am on the lake. Sometimes it's down by the dam, sometimes it's the midsection you want to be, sometimes it is the upper section that you want to be in. And so when you kind of start getting a few more bites or maybe a few more quality bites, really stick to that general zone and hit a lot of areas in that general zone, because there just might be more fish up shallow per capita in that general area of the lake. All right, guys, that's a lot of information, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know down below, and I will see you guys tomorrow.